My name's Claude Hendrickson from Chapeltown, Leeds, or I would say Claude Hopper Hendrickson. Everybody knows me as Hopper in the community. I'm an accredited community-led housing advisor. I'm a community land trust ambassador, and I recently received an MBE for my work with community-led housing. I would see myself as a community advocate rather than a community activist, in that I feel now I have earned the right to advocate on behalf of my community around many different topics, whether it's working with the police, whether it's youth development, whether it's employment and training. Like I said, I was born and brought up and educated in Leeds. I'm of the first generation of black children that were born here. My mother came over from St Kitts and Nevis in 1958 and I was born in 1960. Wow, when you look back, what was it like? It was not nice. Being of that first generation, there was nobody to show us the way. We were kind of making up the rules as we went along. So the first thing I always say I had to learn was the difference between Irish people, English people, Scottish people, and Welsh people. And why I say that is because back then we were living in the times of no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. So the Irish were the first kind of white people I got to know. And the British didn't like the Scottish, and the English didn't like the Scottish, and they didn't like the Irish. So our friends we would play with in the street were Scottish and Irish, which was a strange conundrum because back then we suffered real racism from English people, but when we said white people, it was the white English people, not the Scots and not the Irish. And it's important for me to mention that because even though we were black children, we were not anti-white because we had white people. We were linked in with Scottish. We were going in the Scottish people's houses. We were going in the Irish people's houses, but the English we realized as time went on. So racism was the first thing you had to experience. People shouting things at your mother and you was young, you was walking, you didn't really realize, but there was some nasty things being said to your parents as you were walking to the shops and things like that. So then, obviously, I ended up in a primary school in Chapeltown called Calper Street Primary School, which was predominantly black children. So there was something like 94% of the children in the primary school were black. And actually that was a good thing because it made us feel quite protected and quite strong. And white people didn't mess with us in primary school. That led on to me leaving there at 11 and going to a high school, which was the absolute opposite. I ended up in a high school where black kids were 3% of the school population and the majority of the kids were white kids, and it was in quite an affluent area of Leeds. So again, racism there, I'll give you an example. For the first week, every single day of coming out of school, I had to fight with a white guy. Every single day until a teacher intervened and they realized it was not going to happen. So racism was the first thing we had to deal with school children and their parents. That moved on to, let's say, when I got to 15, when the next barrage of racism, which was coming from the police. As young black boys coming home from school, walking around, the police would pull us on the side of the street, distress us, and which all culminated in 1975, the Bonfire Night riots with the police, full on. And because that first generation of us that were born here had come of age, we were now 15, 16, and we'd been pestered for a good number of years, and it came to a head in 75, and there was the Bonfire Night riots of 75, which was a real turning point for me in Leeds and Chapeltown. Around the rest of the country, it was maybe a different thing. At the same time, with the racism, that we were suffering, we'd started a sound system. We used to attend school discos and go to discotheques in the city centre. But everywhere we went to discos, we'd end up in fights, and the police would then come and arrest us, even though the white guys were trying to beat us up. So we decided that's one of the fundamental reasons we started a sound system, to stop us going to town, to do our own thing, create spaces for ourselves, on the back of, as well, taking a step back, on the back of listening to in music. Obviously, as children, we went to school and we listened to music because music was the in thing. And on the back of listening to the Stylistics, Michael Jackson's, the Four Tops, Diana Ross, and of course listening to white music like Mud, the Sweet, the Bay City Rollers, because we listened to white music then whilst we was going to school. It wasn't like it was all black music, and the black music really came on strong, especially reggae music after '74. So we started a sound system again. For me, the sound system was, it actually saved me in the sense that I didn't need to be going to town fighting with white guys now, and we had our own space. We created our own space. People would lend us little cellars and little spaces where we could play our own music. So reggae music kind of came of age, and sound systems was our way out. So I got involved in sound systems like when I was 14, 15, and music became a central point of my life. I was in sound systems, playing all over, playing friends, playing in other cities, Huddersfield, Bradford, Manchester, Birmingham. We played all over. And that was a real camaraderie, good time. And then the Rasta movement came about 77. After I remember going to see Bob Marley at Leeds University in '76, and the Rasta movement just came, and again it was another thing that happened that gave us spiritual and cultural guidance, I'd like to say, because for me, my mother never forced me to go to church. A lot of my friends, their mothers and fathers forced them to go to church and forced them to go to Sunday school. I wasn't one of those that was pushed down that road. My mother, yes, did give me the New Testament, but she allowed me a bit of freedom. So when Rasta came, Rasta was my first religious black conscious. Oh no, well, I wouldn't say black conscious because I knew about the Black Panthers and I knew about Malcolm X, but Rasta gave me a sense of belief, a sense of empowerment, a sense of we can do better. So with the Rasta movement and being part of 12 Tribes, it was a really harmonious cultural part of my life, which I believe, set me on a good course, and it stopped me going to town and going to the nightclubs and mixing with white people, where I think if it had continued to do that, I'd have probably ended up in prison for maybe badly hurting some white person, because that was, the enemy was white indigenous young people. So sound systems, I got involved with that, hosting events in Chapeltown, like I said, and around Yorkshire, which moved on and led me into community radio. So I got involved in community radio like 86, 87, and that was coming to London, because we used to come to London to buy records. So I knew London really well, and I knew Birmingham, and I knew Manchester, because we'd come out there to go to dances. So linking up with guys in London, we started a radio station back in 86, and the radio station went on right up until 2022. When we started the station journey was a long journey. It wasn't as simple as just me. Three of us started out. We started a station called Horizon. Then that changed its name to WYBC. We thought it meant West Yorkshire Broadcasting Company. The community called it We're Young, Black and Conscious. So WYBC was a group of us that created that. Then we split up. And in 1992, I had my own station from 1992 till 2022, which was called People's FM. So People's FM became my voice for the community. And part of radio for me was really making sure that Chapeltown was on the map, because all the big cities had radio stations, and I always felt if we had to represent, so having a radio station was representing, making sure that if people came from London, they would say, oh, Leeds has got a radio station, because we had a massive carnival, so it was important that we had a radio station. So I got involved in radio, and at that same time, I got involved in community work. I've done many community projects. I did a project back in 89, 90, where a group of unemployed people, frontline self-build, a group of unemployed guys went through a process and built their own houses, laid 92,000 bricks, 52,000 blocks themselves, built 12 semi-detached houses. That after my children is my proudest moment in my life, because when we set out on that, I was told that there was no evidence that a group of black men working together could achieve anything. So I wanted to disprove that. And my life has been very much like that, going against the grain. Even at school, it's always, I won't achieve anything, so I've gone on and done that. And then I went on to work with young people and ran an organization called the Chapeltown Young People's 10 to 2 Club. I ran that for a number of years, because I came to the understanding that the biggest corrupter of our young people is summer holidays, in that if you're poor and disadvantaged, the 6 weeks holidays when your parents are going to work, it's kind of, if your parents don't find things for you to do during the 6 weeks holidays in the summer, you will find things to do for yourself that might be detrimental to you. So I ran that organization, which led us to, in 2000, opening the first internet access point in the city of Leeds, and for black young people. But in the city of Leeds, as it stood, we owned a project called Yes Cyber, which was on Chapeltown Road. Again, I wanted to make sure the Leeds young people knew what the internet was, because I'd been out to Europe and I'd been to America and I'd been around the world, and I'd seen that internet was coming. So I opened Yes Cyber with the 10 to 2 Club. Then we helped. One of the things I wanted to do was help young people. Young people had asked me, how do they become what I am? How do they get a job like that? So we ran a volunteering project for young people to volunteer in the community. I've now gone on, obviously, with my experience of community-led housing. I'm now I'm the first black male accredited community-led housing advisor in the UK. I'm also a community land trust ambassador, trying to help black people take control of assets, land, build more housing. As young people growing up, we were learning the culture of what was the UK and trying to find out where we fit. And to kind of tell you how we kind of got to Bonfire Night. The police were pests, but we also had the skinheads, the mods, the teddy boys. All of these groups were groups that attacked black boys mainly. And how I got involved in a situation was that I had a friend who became a mentor of mine that came from America, came from New York, and he had come from New York, and he was coming over, and from 1973, 74, 75, and he was growing up in America in the times of the Warriors. I don't know if you've seen the Warriors movie. So he came from New York. He was born in England originally, but he'd gone to New York when he was at primary school, and he came back from New York, and he came with a mentality of empowerment. And what he did, he formed a group called the Black Dragons, And these black dragons would, if you can understand, in Chapeltown, you would have teddy boys coming over and beating up our parents. Then you'd have the skinheads beating up our parents. And so we formed a group that would push back these. So we went fighting these white guys all over in different places. And what happened was 1974, the Bonfire Night in England is a historical night where actually it's one of the biggest community developers. So if you live in a street back then, on Bonfire Night, everybody would throw out pieces of stuff out of their houses into the street, and you'd have a bonfire. And it would be the way that you could get to know your neighbours, because they would all come out and we'd all burn stuff out of our houses. And we'd get fireworks. And so Bonfire Night was it was a community night. You know, we didn't ask for Bonfire Night to be created. You know, I've always wondered why you celebrate somebody that tried to blow up the Houses of bloody Parliament, but that's another thing. So what happened was the black people started to gather down a street called Spencer Place, because the police had started saying that we couldn't have bonfires in back streets because they tarmacked the back streets, so we couldn't have bonfires. So all these black people decided there was still some cobble roads down a Pacific street, so they decided to have the bonfire night there. The white people around there complained. This is 1974. So the police and the fire engines came and hosed everybody down. Grandmother, Pickney, everybody get hosed down by the fire engine and the police. So that kind of set it up for 1975. So 1975, we had a big meeting with the police and everything. And we says, right, we're having our bonfire night down in this street, and we don't want no police coming down there and blah, blah, blah. So what happens, one police officer, I think the truth of the matter, we heard in court anyway, they decided to have a bet at the police station. And they threw money in this hat and dared whoever would one police officer drive through this crowd. So this police officer drove through the crowd. He got halfway through the crowd and everybody realized it was a police officer, and all hell got let loose. And that was the spark that created Bonfire Night riots, because he came in, obviously he got his car stoned, then the police had to come and rescue him, the war started, and it was just all hell got let loose. And I was 15 years old and I was arrested, and I was actually the youngest person that was sent to prison at 16 years old. Max Farrer was the only white guy that was in there. He wasn't even involved. He was just in a garden down at the end of the street, and he was taking pictures, and the police must have rushed him, grabbed all of his camera and arrested him. And Max is a few years older than me, so I was 15, so going up to 16. So we had a long court case, and that's when I met, as one of my mentors, he became my mentor. I met Darcus Howe and Rudy Narayan, and all of them came up from London as our solicitors and our barristers. A team came up, and that's how that was a massive change in my life. I was 76. I was sent to prison, as first time I'd ever been in prison, and I was sent. They decided, because we'd been in a riot with the police, they were going to send me on this round robin. They sent me to Armley prison at 16. Then I went to Strangeways prison in Manchester. Then I went to a prison in Durham, where I was the only black guy and 400 inmates. And they sent me on this round because they was of the opinion they was going to break me. And I went through the circuit and came back out, and Darcus was waiting for me when I came back out. And Darcus saw when I came back out, the first thing I did when I came, he invited me to London. So I went to London, 76, 77, and went to Race Today magazine. It was in Brixton then, on the main road in Brixton, Atlantic Road. So that was 77. And it was really a pushback on the police, because the police the police were really, really bitchy on us. I can't even describe what it was like. They really treat us crazy as young black boys. But I look back on it and think the system just didn't know how to deal with us because their rules weren't written for dealing with black people, and we had cultural differences to white people. So my father left me when I was 2 years old, and it's quite funny because he came up. My mother had two children with him, and he then left her and dated a white lady, and then took her back to the Caribbean. So, but by the time I was 6 years old, another guy had stepped in, and I have to give a lot of credit to my stepfather, my youngest brother's father, because he came to and picked my mother up and got into a relationship with my mother, and she already had children, and he didn't have any, but he stuck around for 13 years. So on reflection, even though I didn't have my father, I had a male figurehead within our family, and he made sure that we were looked after. We ate food. He drove a car. He was one of the only guys that had a car. So, for example, I went places. So for me, on that journey, I suppose because I was in for the riots, it wasn't like being in there for a thieving or burglary or something like that. I was in there because I'd fought for the community. So when we were going to court, they were outside court every day. We were in court for 5 weeks. And so you had a sense of importance. People were sending you letters every day. People were coming with my mom to visit me. So it wasn't, I was in prison, but it was for a good cause. I was more upset for my mom than I was for myself. And so that's how, so it was traumatic, but on reflection, it was a learning thing. And for me, it worked for me. It might not have worked for other people. I've never been back to prison again. And like I said, I came out with a city and guilds. The trauma actually was when I came out. That was a bigger trauma because two things happened when I came out. One, the black people that had benefited from the fact that we'd rioted, they weren't receptive when I came out. So I was kind of upset about that. I didn't feel when I came out I was respected for actually going through that process on behalf of the community. And then what happened in Chapeltown, Jack the Ripper was a big thing. The Ripper in York, the West Yorkshire Ripper, he'd killed a girl in Prince Philip's, which is a girl I'd been to school with. I knew her. I actually sat 2 seats away from her in school. And Jack the Ripper had created another policing of our community. So our community was under this umbrella of the police again. Even though had the riots, the police were, because they in their minds had believed that Jack the Ripper, this person that was raping these women, was a black man, because it was happening in the black community. That was traumatic because the police had almost had the freedom to treat us any way they wanted. If we was on the street after certain hours, they could pull us and stop us because they were interviewing people about the Ripper. And it was a really weird time. That was traumatic. The prison was interesting. I saw it as another education, but what I came out to was more traumatic. The housing project came out of, because housing is fundamental. And if you look back on that time, black people, when they came to Britain in the 60s, they were put in postally discriminated areas in Britain where poor white people lived. And the housing in them areas were not up to scratch. And what happened was, to bring us to that, was in 1981, they had those mainstream riots right across the country, where it started in Bristol on the Thursday afternoon. The Friday night it went to Birmingham, and then by the end of the weekend, every black community across the country was in riots. Liverpool, Manchester, all across. And the riots of 81, to come to the housing thing, were not about how we were being policed. It was more, and it was after we'd come down to where the fire was in London. We'd been down there near Peckham, New Cross. We'd been down to London on coaches. A coach had gone from Leeds to London after the New Cross fire, and that house had been burnt down and blah, blah, blah. And we came back and we had these riots, and the riots of 81 were more about economic change. Our parents wanted better employment for us, better jobs, better education, better housing. Housing was the top of the list. And in the area where we lived in Chapeltown, in most streets there was dereliction, lots of houses boarded up. It was really, housing was a major issue. So as we went along, I after the riots of 81, I got onto this committee, and I was the youth, the youth rep. I got onto this committee. They created this organization called the Heralds and Chapeltown Liaison Committee, that we liaised with the council and the police. And young girls, if they got pregnant, they would have to leave home. So, but single boys, it was you were at the bottom of the housing ladder. So how would you, if you left home, you were sleeping at your auntie's, or you were sleeping at a cousin's, or you were sleeping. So housing became a major issue. And so did high unemployment. And the other side of it was that our parents, the men, had come up from the Caribbean, and a lot of them were tradesmen, but they couldn't get work locally. So a lot of when they talked about absent fathers then, the fathers were absent because they had to go and work far away. They had to go to Newcastle. They had to go to Scotland because they couldn't get work locally, and they would go and work away for in 6-week chunks and then come back. So they weren't really absent. They were working. So many of them, my stepfather included, took his time, bought these construction tools, these joinery tools that were at home in this big box, because the black men couldn't go on building sites and get the tradesman jobs. They had to do the labouring, because the building site I realised after years, the building site is a very dangerous place. And the white man wanted to say, the joiners are all white, but the labourers they're the fodder. So that's why I wanted to prove, again, it was against the grain. I wanted to prove that our black men, if they'd have been given the support, we could have renovated the houses where we lived. And what we then saw was gentrification. So we see Brixton was gentrified, Hackney was, Dalston was gentrified, Chapeltown, all the black areas around the country were gentrified because all of the housing was derelict. They knocked them down and built these red brick houses. So that's how I got into the housing and took that on. What I would say to young people now is that formal education up to 16, 17 can seem hard, but make the most of it. Absolutely. The system may feel like it's against you. Don't give in. Finish school. The first thing you get in life is school. Finish it. Even if you don't get the greatest grades in the world, it's the first thing you have to complete, because systematically, my experience has shown me that the young black boys that end up being excluded from school are the ones that go to prison. 9 out of 10 of them. The young girls that end up being excluded from school are usually the ones that become teenage mothers. Facts. So education is fundamental. The other side of that, I would say, to parents, understand the education system, become governors, have a relationship with the school. Because if you're a parent that has a relationship with the school, or the school finds that you will come and complain, they'll look after your child. But if you don't be a parent that goes and make sure parents' evening you turn up, the school has got to see you. The school has got to know that you're supporting your child. So that's what I would say to young people. School is not easy, but life is not easy. And it doesn't make no difference whether you're educated here, Jamaica, St. Kitts, you got to get some formal education. And parents have to be supportive. Then I would say, as a community, we have a responsibility as well. Because one of the things I learned from working with young people, I did a lot of research with them and asked them questions. One of my greatest findings with young people is young people felt that older people are only interested in their child. If their child is doing well, they're okay. Now, young people felt that older people are not interested in young people.